Michael Jackson was far more than a famous performer. He became a phenomenon, a symbol recognized across the world, and a creative force who helped reshape the landscape of modern music. His voice, stage presence, and artistic vision influenced generations and left an imprint that still echoes through popular culture today. Yet beyond the glittering glove, the gravity-defying dance steps, and the endless applause from millions of fans, there existed a life surrounded by curiosity, expectation, and questions that never seemed to fade. Living under the brightest spotlight meant that every decision, every change, and every moment of silence was examined by the world. Over the years, audiences noticed his evolving image, the transformation of his public appearance, and the waves of speculation that followed him wherever he went. In many ways, the world saw the legend on stage, but the deeper story behind the spotlight remained a puzzle that continued to fascinate people everywhere. For many years, public conversations often focused on one simple explanation: cosmetic procedures. Yet as more verified information gradually emerged, the picture appeared far more layered and emotional than the early assumptions suggested. Questions that once seemed straightforward began to reveal deeper dimensions about health, personal identity, and the immense pressure that can come with living under constant global attention. What truly stood behind those visible changes? What experiences might he have been quietly carrying while millions watched his every step? Some observers pointed to medical factors, others to personal choices, and still others to the invisible weight of worldwide fame that few people could fully understand. In the end, the story was never just about appearance. It became a reminder that behind even the most recognizable figure on the planet, there can exist a private journey filled with complexity, vulnerability, and chapters the public may only ever partially see. In a silent clinical room, under bright medical lights, Michael Jackson lay completely still as specialists carried out the formal examination that follows the end of a life. It was a moment that, in many ways, revealed how much strain and exhaustion had quietly accumulated over the years behind the dazzling public image. Away from the stage lights and cheering crowds, the scene reflected a far more fragile reality than the world had imagined. Reports noted a body that appeared extremely light, a sign that the pressures of an extraordinary life may have taken a deeper toll than anyone realized. In that calm and controlled environment, professionals carefully documented their findings, piecing together clues about his health and final days. When the official conclusions were later shared, many fans around the globe reacted with stunned silence, realizing that the story behind the legend was far more complex and human than the headlines had ever suggested. Behind the dazzling image of the King of Pop, Michael Jackson was also a human being, carrying quiet struggles few people could see. Audiences witnessed the brilliance of his performances, yet the private moments behind the stage lights were often far more reflective and solitary. Beneath the makeup and applause existed a person navigating the immense expectations that came with global fame. Michael seemed to believe that reaching an even higher level of perfection would bring greater admiration from the world. Yet the journey carried a quiet paradox. The closer he moved toward that ideal, the more complicated it sometimes became to hold on to the simple sense of self that had first inspired the legend. When the concerts ended and the cheers slowly faded, Michael Jackson was sometimes left with quiet moments away from the spotlight. In those calmer hours, people close to him recalled that he occasionally looked through old photographs from earlier stages of his life, images he had once set aside because he felt they were not perfect enough. With time, those same pictures seemed to carry a different meaning. They reflected a simpler chapter, before the expectations of the world grew so immense. Perhaps what he searched for in those memories was not perfection at all, but the feeling of seeing that familiar face again, natural, sincere, and connected to the person he had always been. The face of youth, of dreams that once felt endless, yet time never moves backward, and somewhere along the way, the quiet journey between the reflection in the mirror and the person searching for himself reached its final chapter. Michael Jackson, an unforgettable icon of the 20th century, left behind a legacy that went far beyond music and performance. His story reminds the world that even behind the brightest spotlight can exist moments of solitude and reflection that few people ever see. But what the world rarely saw was the quiet fragility that seemed to grow as Michael Jackson entered one of the most demanding phases of his life. Behind the dazzling performances was a body that had been pushed through years of intense schedules, rehearsals, and constant travel. The audience saw the brilliance under the stage lights and heard the thunder of applause, yet much of the effort required to maintain that energy remained invisible. Like many performers who devote themselves completely to their craft, he carried physical strain and deep exhaustion that he rarely spoke about in public. While fans celebrated the magic of the moment, the reality behind the scenes often involved quiet endurance and determination, reflecting how extraordinary dedication can sometimes come with a hidden personal cost. Later medical reports also indicated that Michael Jackson had relied at times on certain supportive medications, typically used in clinical settings to help manage sleep difficulties or relieve ongoing discomfort. Specialists have often explained that long-term reliance on such treatments can carry significant risks, especially for someone whose body had already experienced years of intense physical demands. For an artist who spent decades performing, traveling, and rehearsing at an extraordinary level, the strain accumulated over time. These details later reminded many observers that behind the remarkable career and unforgettable performances was a person whose health had been shaped by years of relentless dedication to his craft. When officials later revealed that Michael Jackson's weight had fallen to an unexpectedly low level, many people around the world were deeply surprised. The performer, who once radiated powerful energy on stage, now appeared far more fragile, reflecting years of intense work and exhaustion. Observers noted that his body carried the quiet traces of decades of medical care and physical strain, subtle reminders of the demanding path he had followed throughout his career. One member of the investigative team commented that each mark seemed to represent a chapter of a story Michael rarely spoke about publicly, the journey of an artist driven by an extraordinary pursuit of perfection. To many, it became a poignant example of how dedication to greatness can sometimes place a heavy burden on the person behind the legend. Many people believe that Michael Jackson was fearless when facing pain, but those close to him often described a more human reality. It wasn't that he never felt fear, rather, the thought of disappointing expectations sometimes weighed even heavier. Friends recalled that when exhaustion or discomfort became overwhelming, he would retreat to a quiet space, play soft music, and lie still in the dark for a while, seeking a moment of calm. During those periods, he preferred not to be disturbed. In such moments, the global superstar seemed to step away from the spotlight entirely, appearing less like a legendary performer and more like an ordinary person trying to steady himself under the immense pressures surrounding his life and career. One staff member once recalled hearing Michael Jackson quietly whisper late at night that all he wanted was a full, peaceful night of sleep. The wish sounded simple, yet for him rest had gradually become difficult to achieve. Over time, reports suggested he relied on certain supportive medications intended to help with sleep and recovery, something medical experts often caution must be carefully managed. According to those familiar with the situation, the demanding schedule and years of physical strain made it harder for his body to regain balance. There were moments during rehearsals when even short periods of intense practice left him visibly exhausted, requiring time backstage to recover. These details later reminded many people that behind the remarkable performances stood an artist whose body had carried the weight of decades of relentless dedication. People who worked closely with Michael Jackson later recalled quiet moments backstage that the audience never saw. On certain days, he would sit alone in the dressing room, gazing at the mirror in deep thought. Sometimes his hands would absent-mindedly wrap bandages around his wrists or chest, not because of any immediate injury, but seemingly as a small ritual to calm his emotions. When someone knocked on the door, he occasionally replied with a poetic phrase, saying he was fixing a crack inside. At the time, the words puzzled those around him. Only later did some realize he might have been referring to the invisible strain carried by a body and mind that had endured many years of intense work, treatments, and the constant pressure of life under the global spotlight. For many people, cosmetic procedures are simply a way to enhance appearance, but for Michael Jackson, they seem to carry a deeper meaning, almost like a form of reassurance, a hope that each change might bring a little more peace of mind. Yet, as time went on, some observers felt that the more adjustments he pursued, the more complicated his relationship with his own image became. People often said he lived behind a mask, though not a literal one. Instead, it was a symbolic shell formed by enormous expectations, both the standards he set for himself and the powerful image the world had created around a global legend. He once quietly shared that he only wished to look a little more beautiful so that, when he stepped onto the stage, the audience would feel happy to see him. And in many ways, Michael Jackson did leave people amazed, but not always in the way he had imagined. According to accounts from people around him, a doctor once spoke frankly and suggested that it might be time for him to stop pursuing further changes. Michael responded with a gentle smile and softly admitted that it was not so easy. In that brief exchange, many later sensed the depth of the struggle within him, a moment where the pressures of perfection, expectation, and identity quietly met in a few simple words. Behind the dazzling image of a legend, Michael Jackson was also a person quietly searching for himself. The public saw the brilliance of the stage lights, but rarely the solitude that could follow once the applause faded. As the pressure to maintain a perfect image grew stronger, the distance between the performer and the person behind the name sometimes felt wider. After shows, those close to him recalled that he occasionally sat alone, looking through old photographs, pictures he had once set aside because he thought they were not beautiful enough. With time, those images seemed to carry a different meaning. Perhaps what he longed for most was simply to glimpse that earlier version of himself, again natural, sincere, and untouched by the immense expectations that later surrounded his life. That was the face of youth, a time when dreams still felt untouched by the passing years, yet time never moves backward. Somewhere along the way, the quiet journey between reflection and identity reached its final chapter for Michael Jackson. The world remembers him as a legendary icon whose music and performances shaped an era, but his story also reminds us that behind the brilliance of fame can exist moments of solitude that few people ever see. In the end, beyond the glamour and admiration, his life left a powerful reflection on the human side of greatness, how even the brightest stars can carry private struggles that remain far from the public eye. Michael Jackson was often said to wear a mask, yet in reality it was not something covering his face. It was the powerful image the world had attached to him, an identity that gradually became inseparable from the person behind it. When the stage lights turned on, audiences saw boundless energy, a radiant smile, and dance movements that seemed almost beyond ordinary limits. To millions, he represented a legend who could transform music into pure spectacle. Yet behind that flawless performance was a determination to keep the show alive no matter how demanding it became. He understood that people came to witness something extraordinary, not the fatigue that might exist behind the scenes. And so, with the discipline that defined his entire career, he continued giving everything he had to preserve the magic that audiences around the world had come to expect. A close friend once reflected that Michael Jackson rarely wanted to show vulnerability. He seemed to worry that if the world saw his weaker moments, people might believe the legendary king of pop was no longer the same. So much of what he felt, anxiety, fatigue, and solitude, was kept quietly behind the elegant image that audiences continued to admire. To many observers, that became one of the most subtle struggles of his life. The effort to keep pace with a powerful public identity while still trying to remain connected to the person behind it. In that sense, his story reflected the challenge of carrying expectations so large that they sometimes felt bigger than the individual who first inspired them. When the stage lights faded, Michael Jackson was no longer the legend the world applauded. In those quieter moments, he returned to being simply a person, someone facing the same physical and emotional limits that every human must eventually confront. It was not appearance itself that shaped the hardest parts of his journey, but the constant effort to keep an image forever flawless. To the audience, he carried a gentle smile that became one of the most unforgettable symbols of his career. Yet behind that smile, there may have been a deep weariness known only to him. And when the final traces of stage makeup were gone, what remained was the real Michael, thoughtful, vulnerable, and perhaps still hoping that somewhere beyond the spotlight, there existed a place where he could be accepted without needing to be perfect. Many details only became clearer after the official reports were released. On the 25th of June, 2009, when news spread that Michael Jackson had passed away, millions of people around the world felt a deep sense of shock and sadness. Yet it was only later, when medical documents and formal investigations were shared publicly, that the audience began to understand more about the difficult pressures he had faced in his final years. What emerged was not a dramatic spectacle, but a quieter and more complex story, one shaped by exhaustion, intense expectations, and long periods of solitude. For many, it became a reminder that behind the brilliance of a global icon can exist struggles that remain largely unseen during a lifetime. According to the official findings released after his passing, Michael Jackson had been using a powerful sleep aid, typically administered only in controlled medical environments under professional supervision. For most patients, such medication is reserved for specific clinical situations. In Michael's case, reports suggested it had become a way to obtain a few hours of deep rest after long periods of severe insomnia left him exhausted. Specialists reviewing the case later explained that his body had already been under strain from years of intense work and the medical treatments used to manage pain and stress. When medications designed for strict medical use are not handled with precise conditions and monitoring, they can interfere with the body's natural ability to regulate breathing and recovery. These findings help the public better understand how the final chapter of his life involved not only fame and performance, but also a complex struggle with rest, health, and the demands of an extraordinary career. The official report also indicated that Michael Jackson had lost a notable amount of weight after long periods of stress and ongoing medical care. Observers noted a decline in muscle strength and overall energy, signs that his body had been under considerable strain. The records also described traces of past treatments accumulated over many years, forming a complex picture of the physical demands he had faced. One forensic specialist later explained that there was no clear evidence showing cosmetic procedures were a direct cause of his passing. Instead, the expert suggested that the combined impact of years of treatments, along with the medications used during that time, may have gradually weakened his body. For many people reading those findings, it was a sobering reminder of the extraordinary pressure carried by someone whose life had long been lived under the brightest spotlight in modern entertainment. In his bedroom, investigators reported finding several prescription medications intended for pain relief, stress management, and sleep support belonging to Michael Jackson. On a nearby desk were a few short handwritten notes with simple words such as sleep, peace, and silence. No one could say with certainty whether those words were meant for someone else or written as personal reminders. To many observers, they seemed to reflect a quiet wish for something he had struggled to achieve for a long time. A moment of true rest and calm away from the constant demands of life in the spotlight. Investigation documents later revealed that Michael Jackson had very little body fat left, and his muscle mass had greatly declined, signs of a body worn down by years of intense work and stress. One doctor described him as someone whose strength had slowly been drained after giving so much of himself to the world. This is not a story meant to blame anyone, but a reminder of the heavy price a person can pay after spending a lifetime becoming an icon. Not because of surgical scars, but because of a quiet obsession within his own soul, something no one could truly stop. When the official conclusions were released, the music world fell silent. Millions who once danced to Billie Jean, Beat It, and Thriller had to face a simple truth: Michael Jackson was not immortal. From that moment, people began to see the final years of his life in a very different light. Cancelled shows due to exhaustion, and appearances with gloves, masks, and sunglasses even without cameras. For years, the press called it eccentricity, but in truth, Michael Jackson was simply trying to hide a fatigue he could no longer overcome. His death was not only shocking news, it made millions wonder what could push a genius, someone who seemed to have everything, to rely on medication just to find a little peace. Perhaps the answer lies in the final lines of the investigation report, where every trace and weakness was recorded with cold precision. Though they were only dry pages of paper, they became a harsh reminder of the price fame can demand. When the world looked back at Michael Jackson, they no longer saw only a legend. They saw a man who had pushed himself for too long, trying to live up to the expectations the world had placed upon him. Michael Jackson made the world smile, yet often struggled to keep that smile for himself. When the stage lights faded, what remained was not records or awards, but a quiet silence that lingered in the hearts of millions who loved him. In that silence, there was no glamour, no title of king of pop, no image to maintain only a fragile human being, and a legacy that will never fade. There was a deep paradox in Michael Jackson, a man who seemed to have everything, yet kept searching for something more genuine beneath the glamour of fame. To the world, he was an icon of limitless creativity, an artist who broke boundaries in music, dance, and culture. When his songs played, differences seemed to disappear. People forgot about skin color, prejudice, or rumors, and simply listened to a voice that felt able to cross every border. Perhaps it was through music that Michael Jackson could truly return to himself. Each time he closed his eyes and sang, people saw a different side of him, more genuine, emotional, and deeply human, as if every note carried a quiet message from his heart to the world. In a 2002 interview, he said, "What matters is the soul, not the skin." At the time, it sounded like a simple remark, but now it feels like a belief he lived by, that art and love have no color and no boundaries. Strangely, despite being hurt, misunderstood, and constantly scrutinized, Michael Jackson rarely responded with bitterness. Instead, he chose compassion, helping poor children, supporting patients and war victims, and quietly giving to many charitable causes. He often visited hospitals, holding the hands of sick children and softly singing to comfort them. For Michael Jackson, music was never just a profession, it was a way to heal both himself and others. When he performed "Heal the World," it felt less like a performance and more like a reminder of compassion and hope. Perhaps that message became his most beautiful farewell to the world, that kindness and love still have the power to heal. Perhaps that was the only way Michael Jackson could reclaim a little peace that life had long taken from him. Many saw him as a beacon of art, but few admitted he also carried deep, quiet pain. Behind every dazzling success were struggles only he fully understood. His life felt like a symphony of contrasts, light and darkness, ambition and anxiety, the man and the icon. He loved his audience, yet feared their expectations. He stood in the spotlight, yet sometimes longed to disappear. Amid that whirlwind of contradictions, Michael Jackson became one of the greatest icons of the 20th century, an artist caught in the pursuit of perfection he helped create. The cost of that status was not only his health or appearance, but also the chance to live as an ordinary person in a world where every mistake was magnified. To preserve an immortal image, he often had to set aside the fragile human within. Each change in appearance, each sleepless night, and each smile before the cameras seemed like another small piece of himself given up to keep the legend alive. Yet it was from that tragedy that the greatness of Michael Jackson seemed even more deeply carved. Despite his silent struggles, he continued to move millions of hearts. When he performed Man in the Mirror, the world seemed to pause. The message of the song about looking at oneself and choosing to change felt almost like a reflection of his own life, a man constantly trying to transform himself while inspiring others to look inward and ask what the world asks of the people it admires. After Michael Jackson passed away, the music world felt a profound void, one that seemed impossible to fill. Across many cities, millions gathered with candles, softly repeating the words of "You are not alone." It was more than a memorial. For many, it felt like a quiet apology, a recognition that while the world admired the brilliance of a legend, it often overlooked the struggles of the person behind it. Years have passed, yet the name Michael Jackson still echoes whenever a familiar melody plays or someone shouts, "Shimon," in a crowd. He lives on not in form, but in memory, in music, and in moments that move the human heart in ways few artists ever could. And perhaps that is the truest form of immortality. Michael Jackson was more than a star. He was a reminder that people can reach incredible heights, but if they never pause, that greatness can also consume them. He lived brilliantly, changed the world of music, and even through his struggles, became a light that continues to inspire generations. And perhaps somewhere beyond the stage and the spotlight, he finally found the peace he had always been searching for. Michael Jackson left behind more than music. He left a lasting question about the line between the human being and the legend. He lived, loved, gave, and struggled while pursuing something everyone desires: the freedom to be oneself. Behind the layers of fame was a sincere heart, hoping to be understood and loved not for the image the world created, but for who he truly was. If you found today's story about Michael Jackson meaningful, please hit like and share it with others who love him too. Don't forget to subscribe to support us. Your support gives us the motivation to keep bringing you unique stories you won't find anywhere else. See you in the next video. Thank you so much.